Poland Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
For 22 years after the UN was founded, the government that calls itself the Republic of China, which is quartered in Taiwan, occupied the permanent Chinese seat in the Security Council of the United Nations. Then came Resolution 2758 in the fall of 1971. The ROC was ousted and the Peking government, which calls itself the People's Republic of China, took over. After 22 years of isolation, the ROC, Taiwanese government, now seeks re-entry into the UN. Here in New York to plead his case is Dr. Jason Hu. Dr. Hu is the Director General of the Information Office of the ROC. He was a guest of this program a couple of years ago when we broadcast from Taipei. Dr. Hu was born in China, but attended college in the United States and received his doctorate from Oxford. He has taught at several American universities before returning to Taipei. With us to discuss the question is Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was, of course, National Security Advisor to President Richard Nixon when the ROC were kicked out of the UN on the eve of Mr. Nixon's visit to China. There is a story there of great interest told in Dr. Kissinger's eloquent memoirs. I'd like to begin by asking Dr. Hu, how can the United Nations accept your government, given that it claims sovereignty over mainland China?
Ever since 1991, I think we have been pragmatic enough to announce that we do not at this moment control mainland China. What we're trying to tell the world is that under this one China principle, to which everybody has expressed support, we think that China is at this moment divided. The reality is that there are two parts within that one China, and none of each party exercise jurisdiction over the other. And therefore, we need to be represented in the UN. And the fact that there are divided nations that were represented in the past, obviously in the case of Germany, didn't really impact or create problem for the unification in the end. So at this moment, we're saying that 21 million people in Taiwan do not have proper representation in any of the important international government organizations, and it would not harm the international community. And it would also meet the needs of our dignity and needs for us to be re-involved.
Well, before we pursue that question, isn't there this difference between Germany, West Germany, East Germany, and your government and mainland China's, which is, theirs was a separation brought on by war, yours by a civil war, so that you have a kind of ambiguity here that the Germany's, or the Koreas, for instance, didn't have. Is that not correct?
Quite right, sir. Because you cannot find two cases exactly the same. Of course, the German cases and the Korean cases would not be the same as our cases. But what I was trying to say is that if people say that we're trying to get in, and then that would perhaps produce two Chinas or permanent separation, that's what I was trying to say. When you have perhaps two entities under the one China principle, that does not necessarily mean it would never be reunified again. That's what I was trying to say.
Well,
citing the case of Germany.
Let me ask Dr. Kissinger this question now. In your view, is the question proposed by Dr. Hu something that gets adjudicated with reference to protocol or with reference to politics?
I understand Dr. Yu's point of view, and I can understand that a Taiwanese representative of the Republic of Taiwan would hold this point.
Republic of China.
Republic of China,
yes.
sorry. Would hold this point of view. I have to look at it from the U.S. point of view. From the U.S. point of view, 4 American presidents of 2 parties have stated that they recognize only one China, and that they would do nothing to promote two Chinas. This was done even by so conservative a president as President Reagan, President Nixon, President Carter, President Reagan, and President Bush. So I believe that what Mr. Hu is proposing, is something that should be negotiated first between Beijing and Taipei. The United States has absolutely no reason to oppose it. The United States would have every reason to support it if there is some prior understanding between the two governments in China.
Is that in prospect, Dr. Hu?
And if I can make just one more point, the German case was only settled after the two German governments
Agreed.
had come to some agreement and had agreed between themselves, and then it was also supported by the United States.
Yes, I agree entirely to what Dr. Kissinger was saying, but let me repeat again that our wish to be re-involved in the United Nations does not violate the One China principle in any way, as I have stated already. We're going in, hopefully, to receive and achieve an international status that is very vital for our own survival and development prior to reunification of One China. But at this moment, China is divided.
Why is it vital, Dr. Hu? Why is it vital? I mean, you've been terribly isolated in the past. And 20 years ago, people wouldn't talk to you practically, except me and Dr. Kissinger.
A dirty word.
That's right. But since then, the vibrancy of your own economy and your extraordinary reestablishment of democracy have made you a powerful country. Why does membership in the United Nations mean so much to you?
Yes, two things, sir. First, the fact that we have been able to do all right in the past without being positively or actively involved in the international organizations does not mean that in the future, when the world may be becoming more smaller and interdependent perhaps, when the World Trade Organization is being formed, more interactions, that would also guarantee our future prosperity. In other words, we have been able to do this being isolated in the past. But we worry that perhaps in the future, when everybody else in the party, we're the only one left alone. When they're making decisions, important international decisions, we're not being considered. And, you know, people at home jokingly said, what do you want us to do? You want us to fail our economy so we are more qualified to be admitted into the UN? I mean, we're not being accused of being too successful, so we don't need the UN. But the fact of the matter is, our people feel very frustrated when we are not treated with perhaps fairness when we travel. You do not know, perhaps, sir. No, one thing.
Yeah.
We tried to give $2 million US as an impartial aid to the refugee in Rwanda. And that was turned down because we're not a UN member. You know, how would our people feel?
Well, let me ask Dr. Kissinger this. After the ouster of Taiwan, the Taiwan Relations Act was passed in the House and Senate, and it said, in effect, to mainland China, don't try to occupy Taiwan because we're not going to let it happen. Now, do you interpret that act as extending such protections as Taiwan would need in the event of its diplomatic isolation, as Dr. Hu fears?
Well, starting with the first visit in China, and even in the Shanghai communique, the United States stated its conviction that the unification of China should be achieved by peaceful means. And in every subsequent American declaration, including the China Relations Act, which I think happened in the Carter administration, that conviction was asserted. And therefore, the United States certainly would oppose the use of force in the settlement of the Taiwan issue. My view is not that China should not be in that Taiwan should not be in the United Nations. My view is that that issue should be faced after some discussions between Beijing and Taipei. I believe also that Jiang Zemin, the president of China in February, made a speech on which it would be possible to build, unless there are some Chinese formulations in there that eluded my less developed brain, because he said that China did not want to have Chinese fight each other, that Taiwan could have its own diplomatic representation, its own military force, so long as some formula could be found to recognize that there was one China. And in a number of international institutions, the Asian Development Bank, and a number of other places, at the Olympic Games, a formula has been found by which Taiwan participated as a clear entity.
That's right.
And yet the principle of one China was recognized. Now, I believe the more constructive approach would be for the United States to encourage China and Taiwan to settle that issue, and then for the Republic of China to enter the United Nations the way the two Germanys did. And
well, Dr. Hu,
my impression is that's achievable.
No,
is this possible, or is this simply a dialectical, or certainly an improbability? Is it dialectical impossibility?
It actually is not possible at this moment the way we see it. Dr. Kissinger mentions the Olympic Committee, the ADB, but in all these cases, in the case of the International Olympic Committee, in the case of the Asian Development Bank, in the case of APEC, and in the case of GATT, which is going to happen, in all these cases where Peking and Taipei are both perhaps member units, we have to fight very hard to secure enough international support. It didn't happen as a result of our direct negotiation or communication or talking with Peking and then reach consensus. We have to secure enough international support and then, sadly admitting, our Chinese own brothers then decide that there's no way they could stop us. Then they say, okay, you come in, but you have to be called Chinese Taipei or Taiwan Common China or Taiwan oblique bracket, whatever. Then they fiddle with the names. We pragmatically have to accept whatever that was agreed. But it didn't really work when we first start talking to them. This is why we need enough international support, and where there's enough international consensus, then we talk to them. And also, it is not our intention trying to drag everybody in, as it may seem that we're trying to drag the Americans in. No, it's not our intention. What we're trying to do is that, you know, people say they remain neutral. The Chinese should solve this themselves. You should talk to Peking and solve the UN problem. But, you know, all the major countries in the world are supporting Beijing's position. They recognize Beijing. They accept Beijing's UN policy. They don't want us to get in. How do you think we can work? I mean,
well,
is that neutrality or is it not neutrality?
You got 22 countries that recognize Taiwan and
29 now.
29.
29.
You've been hard at work. and 100 that recognize Peking. Now, are we talking about the same kind of thing that prevented the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in France in the 19th century, that they wouldn't permit a particular flag that had Jacobinical traces?
Yeah.
Or are you saying that it is more than that, that it's a problem of realpolitik? I guess what I'm asking is, if you were to accept a nominalist change in your name for these purposes, would that satisfy you, or would that be simply refused on the grounds of pride?
Sir, are we talking about the general thing as a return to the international community, or are we talking about the United Nations as such?
Yeah, talk about the UN.
Yeah, well, at this moment, we're being very reasonable and modest. What we really want at this moment is the establishment of a study committee by the UN to study the question of the non-representation of the 21 million people that need to be represented in the international organization.
Yeah,
We're not saying anything.
Does Dr. Kissinger have, you don't have a problem with that, do you? The
We're only
setting of
asking for a study committee.
If I were conducting U.S. policy or advising on U.S. policy, I would be very, very sympathetic to a dialogue between Beijing and Taipei.
Yeah.
And I would strongly encourage it, and I would let both sides know that our goodwill is related to this. I would not want to get the United States into a position of confrontation with Beijing when we have problems with Japan, when we have unsettled conditions in Russia and other parts of Asia. We went to Beijing not because we loved the system originally, but because we thought it was needed in the American national interest.
I agree.
And so we should always calibrate this, but certainly a dialogue between Beijing and Taipei is highly desirable. On the study commission, it depends. The problem is both Chinese sides are extraordinarily clever. And so we have
We're
to make
not as
sure...
clever as you are, sir.
No. I once said to the Chinese, the Communist Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, he said to me, "You're a very intelligent man." And I said, "By this you mean, by Western standards, by Chinese standards, you think I'm of average intelligence." He didn't say, "Oh no, you're smart even by..."
I say now, by Chinese standard, you're also intelligent.
Thank you. See,
I'll make your day. I'll make your
you
day.
made my day. You made my day. Anyway, what I want to make sure of is that there are not some arcane formula which are difficult for us to grasp, which drive the other side right up the wall.
No.
And which are designed, for that purpose. I happen to believe that a solution is possible, and not just from a position of total neutrality, because I think Beijing is realistic, and it realizes that this issue cannot be left hanging forever.
Well, let me ask this question, a technical question. Does the veto authority of mainland China in the Security Council extend to vetoing a proposed commission of the kind you're talking about? Or is that simply up to the Secretary General, the General Secretary?
I think these were defeated for twice, last year and the year before.
Where? Defeated where?
Defeated in the, I think, the steering committee or the agenda committee, whatever it is.
Well, so,
it didn't even become a live agenda, on the an item on the agenda. It was moved.
But a veto was not exercised,
No,
obviously.
not necessary then. I mean, it hasn't even reached that stage. Our friends, some of our member states of the UN, only proposed, I think it was 14 or 18, proposed that the establishment of a study committee. That's all we asked for. We're not talking about names, formula, status.
Well, how do you account for its defeat at the administrative level? Was it pressure from China, from mainland China?
Well, obviously. I mean, a lot of people spoke against it.
And the question is, does the study commission imply, what is it supposed to study, the modalities of entry, or whether it should enter?
How this question, this obvious question of the lack of representation of the 21 million people in Taiwan.
Yeah, but that already presupposes that there will be an entry, and that the only question to be studied is the modality.
It could be a long list of options, from a certain kind of status to certain kind of status. We are very careful. We're not even making public these options, because we know someone will make sure that once it does become a live item on the agenda, if we say these are our options, someone will make sure that we start from the bottom and work our way down.
Would you accept observer status?
We would not say anything now.
Would you accept observer status like the PLO?
Sir, you're asking me to do just what I said I wouldn't do now, because I just cannot do that. We learned our lesson, bitter lessons in the past. We're actually nice people who want to make friends with the world, even with Dr. Kissinger, you can see that. And so I mean, are we asking too much to be just a member of the United Nations, a very important organization?
Well, Peking obviously does think you're asking too much. And since they are the most formidable obstacle to your getting back in, we have to weigh their motives and their authority, right? What are their motives?
Personally, I want to make clear, based on the comment of Mr. Yu, I am not even remotely unfriendly to Taiwan.
I didn't say that.
I have to look at this from the fundamental issue of the United States, its position in Asia, its relationship to all the other countries, and the role of a country that has 1,200,000,000 population. And I would like to navigate this crisis by the United States maintaining good relations with Beijing and using these good relations to protect the ability of the people in Taiwan to lead their own lives, which has been my consistent position. This is the only issue here. And I believe, as I've said before, that this issue can be resolved between Beijing and Taipei without a confrontation between the United States and Beijing. That's the only difference.
No, I agree. I agree.
Difference between as many of these modalities you're talking about, I think can be worked out.
No, yes, there was a time that a lot of decision has to be made, adjustments in policy has to be made in the past. But there also come to a time at this moment when people say that 1 billion people should not be ignored by that important international organization. It was right. But now, also, this 21 million people should not be ignored by the same token. And we are also trying hard to talk to them.
Retrospectively, you think mainland China should have been recognized before it was?
Well, this is a decision for the countries, you know, the United States and other countries to decide, isn't it? Now it seems that one has to be realistic. They are there. They need to be reckoned with as a major factor in the international relations. We have no problem with that. But we just don't want to be victimized by the bilateral consideration between a major power and their relationship with mainland China. Let it be two parallel lines, not a triangle over which we're always victimized.
Now, the only difference between Mr. Yu and myself is, should this be imposed on Beijing by pressure from the outside, or should it be encouraged in Beijing by discussion? And I believe that discussion is
important,
the better way, and in the end, probably the more effective way.
We're trying. I haven't had a chance to explain that we've been trying to talk to the people in mainland China for about 3 years now. Just last week, an important talk was held. We're trying to nourish a better atmosphere. We do not want to be hostile to anybody. There's 21 million people in Taiwan, and we do not want to be confrontational with anybody, even mainland China. We want to have a good relationship. We are at this moment #2 largest investors in mainland China. We want to see it change.
I say you try, and what happens? They don't return the mail, or how do they rebuff you?
Well, we at this moment we think they are not being realistic in the sense that they would never treat us as an equal in any talks, and it is very difficult to move on if you're not even given the basic standing as an equal in any bilateral exchanges. And there are other stalemates, problems, perhaps, that need to be solved. After all, we've been separated for 45 years.
Yeah, under whose auspices do you conduct those negotiations with them that you have conducted, having to do, for instance, with permitting Taiwanese to visit mainland China? 6 million people have. If they refuse to talk to you as a result of these obstacles, how do you accomplish talk at that level? Through Switzerland or through Singapore?
No.
Hong Kong?
These were all dealt between Beijing and Taipei directly. No third party was ever involved. And if we're not getting much in return, we just have to try patiently, you know, and go on trying. That's all. If there's no concrete agreement that can be reached, at least you maintain the door open, and let's settle it next time. I think Dr. Gibbs
what is the role of Washington in accelerating that communion of forces, of wills? What can President Clinton do to help Taiwan out in approaching Peking to discuss these questions?
We are trying to make people in Peking to understand that we do need a proper room in the international community. And if any foreign leaders can help us to also help Peking to understand this, you know, because the fact that they're trying to isolate us in the international community tends to alienate a lot of the people in Taiwan. You know? So,
to answer your question, Mr. Buckley, it's a very tricky, sensitive point. If we say, how can we help Taiwan out? If we say this to Beijing, there would be no receptivity, whatever, because they look at Taiwan as a province of China, and they don't admit our status in adjudicating the integrity, as they see it, of China. On the other hand, in the context of a strong U.S.-Chinese relationship, in the context of a common assessment of the international situation.
15 seconds.
If we explained the necessity of better relations within the Taiwan Straits, I think we would be listened to. And that is the role I think we can play.
I have no problem with
Thank you, Dr. Hu, Dr. Kissinger. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back.
Next week on Firing Line, in the second of 4 programs on the Far East, Bill Buckley and his guests, Henry Kissinger and Jason Hu, discuss relations involving the U.S., Taiwan, and mainland China.
There are 85 breeds of kingfishers, some of the world's most beautiful birds. See Kingfishers on David Attenborough's Natural World tonight at 8. Stay with OPB. The nightly business report is next.
This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support was provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line. For information about a video cassette of this program, write to Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449. That's Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449.
Funding for local broadcast of this program is provided by Entech, an Oregon company bringing the future of microporous membrane and fiber technology to the world today.
On next David Attenborough's Natural World, he may not look the part, but he's the fighter pilot of the bird world.
The fish is stunned before being swallowed head first.
Find out what gives this bird such an eye for a meal. Meet the kingfisher next time on David Attenborough's Natural World.
On OPB, tonight at 8.
Corporate member, the Portland Hilton, has made a major contribution to the Oregon Public Broadcasting Program Fund for Excellence. Additional funding has been provided by you, the contributing members of Oregon Public Broadcasting.
Washington Week has the best journalists in the city of Washington. That's really what makes it distinctive. We try to give the viewer a little more perspective, a little more in-depth discussion, a few more facts. This job seems to open up once every 20 years. And I think it's probably the best job in journalism.
Hello, I'm Louis Rukeyser, inviting you to join me for the next edition of Wall Street Week, when we'll look at what's really happening in Washington in the money game. My guest, Tom Gallagher, is a leading expert on how the closed-door action in Congress today is likely to translate into winners and losers in Wall Street tomorrow. From taxes to profits, we'll probe for the meat behind the political gravy.
On OPB, Friday at 8:30. This is Oregon Public Broadcasting, Oregon's most accessible learning resource.